Thanks for joining us.
Hey, how's it going, Roy?
So, do you want to just start off and just tell us a little bit about like where you grew up and what your childhood was like and how you got into filmmaking?
So I was born in Northampton, Massachusetts. So I was an East Coast boy, and I grew up skateboarding. Skateboarding was really like my my first window into the world of the visual arts. Skateboarding and cinematography goes so well hand in hand because, when you're on your skateboard, so much of it is an expression of how you see the world, how you interact with the world. And when you're a cinematographer, you have you have like a visualization, right, in your head of how you see things. And so that's what you're trying to capture. So I think skateboarding was kind of like um, the teacher to me about just seeing things differently, interacting with your world differently, visualizing things in your head before you actually execute on those things. And through skateboarding, and I picked up a camera. And it quickly became not only just something that I did while I skateboarded with my friends, but it became something that I just loved to use in my everyday life. And I started making short films. And, as I grew older and older and I started to think about my career and what I would do in my life, um, it quickly became apparent that I'd be holding a camera in some way, shape, or form.
Or having the drone hold the camera for you?
Yeah, but that was one of those things that didn't really come to fruition until I moved to Los Angeles. So right after college, I had a friend of mine who moved down here from Massachusetts, and he was like, "Hey, so, me and my girlfriend are gonna move down close to LA, and the rent's gonna be like $1,000 a month. And if you want to move in with us, we can split it evenly 3 ways." So it was kind of a no-brainer. My parents had already moved from the East Coast to Santa Cruz, so I knew I wanted to be out this direction. And I kind of moved down to Southern California on a whim, and very quickly was like, you know what? I think I want to try to really dive into the production world, and see how I can put my talents and my eye to use in the city of industry. And so, you know, I started very small, like a lot of people do here. I didn't make a name for myself and then moved to Los Angeles to make it. I kind of just decided while I was here, let's give this a shot. And was scouring Craigslist on a daily basis for any and all things that would put a camera in my hand. So those early days, that first year, 2 years, I ended up on all sorts of shoots, man. I ended up shooting a beauty pageant on a cruise to Mexico as a crane operator, which I applied for as the crane operator, but I had no idea how to operate that crane. And I only watched like 2 YouTube videos before I showed up to the production meeting on how to set up the crane. And that may sound a little aggressive. It may sound like maybe I was selling myself as something I wasn't, which, yeah, is partly true. But I'll tell you, I had a lot of confidence in my ability to adapt on the fly. And some of those early jobs just gave me more and more of that confidence that, like, hey, I can do this. Like, all cameras operate on the same principles. It's not about what camera you have, it's about what you do with it and how you create emotion with the frames that you take. And so I think very early on, you know, my experience was that, just to give it a shot. And yeah, sure, like maybe tell people that like you really know what you're doing when you kind of don't, but as long as you have the ambition and the will to learn and the confidence in yourself, that really anything is possible. And that allowed me to really just end up fine tuning what kinds of jobs really spoke to me, because I ended up on reality TV and commercials and crappy music videos and B-list feature films. Like, I got a very wide array of, you know, different types of shoots and visual mediums and genres. I think dipping my toes into a lot of different types of shoots, it allowed me to really figure out what spoke to me. What did I actually love about this industry? And was this an industry that could be my career for my life? And as I progressed in my career and I started getting more and more responsibility on set as a DP, I ended up on a job where production had hired a drone operator, and this was back in like 2016. And for context, drones were still relatively new to the production space in 2016. So I instantly just had so much fun collaborating with this drone pilot and putting a camera anywhere I wanted in 3D space. I mean, how cool is that? I don't need a dolly. I don't need a crane. I could do such a wide array of camera moves and place the camera anywhere I wanted with just the small controls on his joysticks on his remote. And that very quickly just like fascinated me and got me excited, and it was just fun. It was pure fun. um, and so he and I started to work together. I started being the camera operator on some of his bigger commercials, and through him I met Michael Izquierdo, who is the owner and head pilot at Beverly Hills Aerials. And so he and I basically joined forces back in 2016 and then built Beverly Hills Aerials into the company that it is today, where we're doing Super Bowls, big feature films, car commercials, of course. And it's just been a gas.
What was your like first kind of drone that you kind of used? Like, what was that? Was it a DJI one or like?
Yeah, I think it was the DJI Inspire 1, I want to say, when it first came out, which is also a dual operator platform. And I remember the drone pilot that day. Um, he took off from the hood of his car, and when he landed it back down on the hood of his car, it like slipped off the hood and fell over, and like he like broke a motor or something. So he was like, oh man, like I guess I gotta go home. I'm gonna go grab another one. I'll be right back. And he comes back, but he comes back with a bigger version of the DJI Inspire 1, which was called the S600, S800, which is like a big hexacopter that had another gimbal and like a Panasonic GH4 or GH3 on it. And he handed me this little monitor, analog monitor, to see what the camera was seeing, and he handed me a remote. So I was actually camera operating for him for the rest of the day on this real estate shoot. And but yeah, I just remember it being so much fun. And from there, it was just like it was just kind of a whirlwind. You know, one thing led to the other, and here we are now.
The way you guys kind of progressed with like drones, like started off with probably the Inspire 1 and then Inspire 2 was like a big explosion. And even today, people still use the Inspire 2, even though the Inspire 3's come out. And then like the FPV stuff and then getting it into like live TV, like just maybe talk about like the progression of like the technology, but also like getting how you kind of built the business and the different kind of projects that you've worked on over the years.
I think a lot of people back in like the late 20 teens kind of built their aerial companies off the Inspire 2, off the back of the Inspire 2 and the Inspire 1 before that, and then the Phantom. So when Part 107 came out, and instead of having a Part 61 fixed wings pilot's license, you had to be able to fly a fixed wing airplane and get that license to be able to fly a drone on a commercial set. But now, after the Part 107 FAA test came out, which is a non-comprehensive 70 question multiple choice test that you get a 70% or above on, and now you're a drone pilot. Now there's so much competition, and I think that was really intimidating back in the day when that legislation was first passed, because 250,000 people in the United States went out and got their drone license at that moment once the legislation changed, because everybody thinks drones are fun to fly. Like, who wouldn't want to make that their profession? But thankfully, we had already kind of established ourselves within the aerial cinematography space and as a company for a couple of years, so that we were able to weather that storm. And, you know, I think, as they say, the cream rises to the top. And so luckily we were able to still be one of the top picks for a lot of producers, directors, and DPs on their commercials and television shows and feature films. And so we were kind of like a three-man operation, where it was Michael, head pilot, me, the camera operator, and Alina, who does our producing, for a number of years until 2020, when we started working for Fox Sports, and Fox Sports brought us onto NASCAR. So when they called us, they gave us 2 weeks before the Daytona 500 to build, test, tune, and then execute live on the air to millions of people, a custom 100, 100 mile per hour FPV racing drone. And so that was quite the feat. And we were able to get everything ready in time by the skin of our chins, and it went off without a hitch. And so it was one of those things where, we do well on this first one, and they invited us to the next race and then to the next race. And sooner rather than later, NBC and CBS started to see the kind of production value that we were adding to Fox's broadcast. And they go, hey, Beverly Hills Aerials, can you guys do the Kentucky Derby for us? So then we started moving into other sports with those other networks. And as a result, not only were we extremely busy, but we needed to grow as a company to be able to accommodate these massive new clients. And it's been really fun, and it's been really rewarding bringing in other people and training them and helping them grow, and instilling in them the same ethos that we have lived by since day one.
So in terms of like the live TV stuff, like what kind of like signal were you using? Like how did you get, like, was it HDMI to like 1080p? Was it reliable? Like how did you figure that out?
Well, the systems have changed. Like they change pretty much every live season, and even throughout the season, we're constantly doing things to refine the systems, because there's 3, 4, 5 sometimes RF signals going to the drone and back to the ground, or from the ground up to the drone, or from the drone out to other antennas around a racetrack or whatever live event stadium we may be at one time. So it's a lot of RF to ensure that all of your systems are working properly. So yeah, it's kind of a hard question to answer, because again, it's always changing. But most of these broadcasts, they're all like 1080i or 1080p, sometimes even 720. They're always 5994, so 60 frames, and everything is very closely frequency coordinated. So at all these events, especially the larger ones, they have frequency coordinators that come by and they say, hey, drone, you're able to use this frequency, this frequency, this frequency, and this one. And so you cannot go without outside of those bands. You have to be within them. And so that in and of itself is quite a technical challenge sometimes.
Cool. And do you want to just explain a little bit about like your role, like an aerial DP? Like what does that entail? Like what does that mean?
Sure. So I think everybody knows for the most part what a director of photography is. Their role is to collaborate with the director and to basically determine what the visuals should be based off of the storyline that the director's written, and to emote the emotions that they're going for with whatever they're shooting. And so when it comes to aerials, it's my job to interpret the director and DP's visions and to get an idea for the emotions that they're trying to instill in their viewers with these shots. And then for me to basically put that into like the physical world by use of flight path and panning, tilting, zooming, choices of cameras and lenses and drones, which tool is right for the job based off of what they want to see on screen. And so it's always a really fun challenge. I love working with my environment and utilizing my environment to help tell a story. And I think that it's back to when I grew up as a skateboarder, where I'm interacting with my environment to do something that I saw in my head, right? So it's very similar, and I feel like I wouldn't be able to be as good at my job as I am if it wasn't for all of my time spent as a teenager skateboarding.
Cool. And then in terms of maybe like the skateboarding, like references, were you watching like the 411 series as like on the VHS tapes, or like the Thrasher? Like what kind of, like maybe the Spike Jones stuff? Like what kind of things were you watching back then?
There's a number of films that were influential to not only my own skating, but just to my cinematography and how I used to get a camera to film me and my friends. I mean, Girls, Yeah, Right, where they used green screen. They painted their skateboards all green and then painted them out in post. So it looked like all these skateboarders were riding around on nothing, like they were just floating across the ground. Fully Flared from the shoe company Lakai. They used a phantom camera in their opening sequence and did 1,500 frames per second to show skateboarding in a completely new light. And I think those videos specifically were really influential because it shows a completely new window into something that's so familiar for a lot of people, right?
Is that the one with the explosions when they land and it explodes? Yeah.
Mike Mocapoli does a switch flip down 8 stairs first try and then has this massive explosion behind him. It's insane.
So, and then in terms of like other, like, were you watching like TV shows or like feature films that you were kind of inspired by in terms of like you were decided to go down this cinematography route? Did you kind of decide maybe like what should I watch? What should I get inspired by? What should I study?
Mm. Yeah, I would say my answer was yes. I've been studying cinematography since I was 5 years old. But the truth of it is I think I think I slowly grew to love the art of cinematography through skating, and then it wasn't until I landed in Los Angeles after college where I was like really going to take it seriously. And so I think I have since then became more of a student to the art of cinematography. So I think the films that are more influential to me are films like, and watching the behind the scenes of films like Children of Men, where they have that, I forget the kind of rig that they call it, but basically the driver is on the roof, but the camera and all the talent are going through this really intense scene where all these people start coming out of the woods to chase them, and the camera is constantly on a swivel looking at every person in the car. And in order to get that shot, they had like this elaborate rig where different seats would move out of the way and the actors would have to shimmy backwards as the camera moved like right by their faces. And I think just like the technicality and the logistics involved to getting these shots that we take for granted when we watch but are so engrossing when we see them, I think that's what really draws me into the art of cinematography. Because if you can make something create the shot that doesn't bring attention to itself, but yet is so artfully done, it really just like pulls you into the film. I think that's something that is just really fun to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, in terms of like that Children of Men Doggy Cam Shot, I've seen some of your like commercials. Like I think it was a Toyota commercial where the camera kind of comes into the van and then flies out. It's like, is that the kind of thing like the director comes to you guys and says, I want to do this. I want the camera to start under the car and then go around it, and then you guys have to kind of figure out, okay, how do we do this? Like, how does that work?
No, you nailed it right on the head. Usually it's something that we've done that inspires a director, that then they come back to us and say, hey, like I love what you did here, like would this be possible? But sometimes like that job specifically, the director just has this vision of an impossible camera move, and then he has his DP reach out to us and be like, hey, how are we going to do this? But we think it's going to be with a drone, but we're not even sure. Like, what do you think? And with that one specifically, that was with the Toyota Sienna. That started as a drone shot. And, the camera comes down, it wraps the back of the car, goes over a guardrail, out over some water, comes back into the back rear door. As it opens, it's the end of the drone shot. And once we got a take of that first part of the shot that we liked, we just pretty much used the end frame of the drone shot and made a basically a 50% like opacity mask over the live view of the camera. Once we went into a gimbal handheld shot and matched the two shots in post. So we were able to basically utilize the still frame from the very end of the drone shot as our starting point for the next shot and just line up the angles and then basically just pass the camera through the middle of the car from one person to another, and go through the middle of the car. But it feels seamless.
Is there any times where you kind of use like CGI maybe for a few frames, like if it's like diving down into the car and then goes through the window? Like, how do you do those kind of shots?
I feel like half the time we will be part of a shot that we don't even really understand fully how it's going to be utilized in the edit. The director basically will just come over and say, "Hey, I want a shot that starts right on top of the car and then goes to the moon as high as you can go, and we're just going to reverse it in post." And it's not until afterwards that you look at it and you're like, "Oh, they actually were they wanted to start as a high and wide, push down into the bottom of the car, and then land inside the car, and they do some visual effects mastery and trickery to just make everything blend really nicely." But it's totally circumstantial. I mean, there's some directors that are super informative and collaborative, and then other ones that tell you exactly what they need, and you're not really sure exactly how they're going to use it. And so it's really helpful, though, as the operators, to know exactly how it will be used, because there's so much nuance to the way these things fly through the air that the more you can understand what they're going for, um, the better the shot will end up at the end of the day, just because everybody's on the same page.
And then in terms of like the early days of like FPV, like what was that kind of like where you guys were just kind of experimenting, like even putting like gimbals on FPV drones and like figuring out like how to get different shots, like diving down buildings and going through all the gaps and all that kind of stuff? Like, what was that like? Yeah.
I mean, FPV drones are still kind of just getting adopted into like the mainstream world. I think they were seen as like very gimmicky for a long time. Like a lot of directors and DPs that we would show this kind of footage to, like back in like 2018, were like, "No, no, no, I want to keep a level horizon." And you're like, "Yeah, but this has so much energy." And to some degree, I agree, but I think it's a tool. And at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's just another tool to convey a certain emotion, or to give a different feel for a shot. And I think a lot of directors and DPs didn't necessarily see that potential in the tool until like somebody big started using it. And I think it's one of those things where like, you know, like once it ends up in big feature films, everybody wants to use it. Once this DP uses this new tool, all the other DPs want to use that tool. But it's really cool to see the progression of FPV drones from even just a couple of years ago, because now not only are the FPV cameras for the pilots like that much more clear, so they can actually see where they're going, but the systems are a lot more robust and reliable. So yeah, man, I think the FPV stuff is a space where there's so much nuance and things are evolving at such a rapid pace. It's allowing a lot more shots that were never able to be done now doable. I mean, we're still just scratching the surface as to what's possible. And I think putting a gimbal, like a small RS3 from DJI, and a small cinema package like a Komodo or an FX6 with like, some nice vintage glass or something with a focus motor, like now you can put what used to have to be on like a big heavy lift drone like the Alta onto a small package that's like this big, still have the remote operator, like 3-axis gimbal control from a second operator, but still fit that package through much tighter gaps and have that much more agility and energy to the shot. So it's kind of like a cool hybrid between both.
People are afraid to embrace technology, especially if people haven't done it before. They don't want to be ridiculed, but somebody has to be there to innovate and kind of show what's possible. So I think, yeah, like you said, it's been implemented a lot more, but it can't be overused. Just like any shot, you can't do 100 like dolly shots or slider shots. You got to kind of vary it and just keep it like entertaining, because if you keep just doing the same dive over and over, it could get repetitive. But
totally, and that's kind of what's happened with FPV is like, the traditional drone shot before FPV, it was like a high and wide, and still a lot of directors in their mind are like, yeah, let's get the drone for a drone shot, which is like a high and wide. That's not quite a helicopter shot, but it's like a lower altitude establisher or something, you know? And now the FPV is like the building dive or like the aggressive spin around a car or something. And so a lot of what makes my job fun is really trying to imagine what else these tools are capable of, and then going out there and just shooting something like as a passion project, just for the sake of like trying to showcase, hey, these tools are capable of so much more. Um, let's incorporate this kind of stuff into your next production, and that's really the fun part, is like just trying to push the boundaries of, you know, what the limits are with the tools.
Yeah, I think I've seen like you guys post on Instagram stuff like that, like, hey, who wants to tell us a shot and we'll see if we can make it. Just kind of posing the question. But I've been talking to these other like car filmmakers, and they get given a document by like the manufacturer of the cars. A lot of the times it's like the heights and angles document. And so they say sometimes they'll do a shot and then the manufacturer or the client or whoever it is will say that's not acceptable because the car looks weird or whatever. So have you ever like run into that? Like maybe the lens was too wide and the car looked funny, or like how does that kind of go?
Yeah, no, sometimes on some car commercials you'll get like a 50-page document from production, you know, before you show up on the day. And the 50-page document has like multiple like perfect angles to showcase the product of the car. And it's just like a rear 5/8, like from 5 feet up is like the perfect angle. And you're like, okay, I get what you're going for, but like this is a flying camera, you know. We're not a Russian arm. We're not just going to be sitting there, um, you know, tracking the car and pulling it from that exact angle. Sure, if you want to like try and feature those specific three quarters or profile or whatever, then yeah, let's go for that. Or let's try and land, you know, a full orbit or this specific move at that angle of the vehicle so that your product looks good. But sometimes I think a lot of people can get too picky about exactly what the shot needs to be rather than allowing it to just flow naturally, because a lot of really incredible things end up happening naturally when you just kind of allow the process to unfold as it naturally will. I understand being intentional with what you want the shot to be, but I think when you become too rigid and specific about what the shot has to be is when you kind of just lose the creativity.
So what's the kind of like, how does the actual shoot go for you guys? Like, because it's a drone, you're limited to the battery life and like the range. So the car kind of goes out on a set path and then you guys just have time to just do your shots, or you kind of limited to like, let's do this exact shot. I guess it varies upon each shoot, but what's kind of like the vibe in terms of like a shoot day? How does that work?
So typically, like I'll just interface with the director and DP. We will have had a scout already, so like I kind of get an idea for what they're going for. I've probably seen a shot list, so I kind of know what angles they're looking for from the drone, whether they are more high and wide establishers or if it's like, you know, drone FPV, like freestyle, like have fun, like crazy stuff never before seen, you know. Then it's like, okay, they just want us to like have fun and get some cool stuff. In which case, I love that because it just allows us to really utilize the environment. I'll look around and be like, there's a tree, there's a low-hanging branch there. Let's fly under this branch, up and over this tree, reveal off of the side of this building. Let's, you know, tilt down from this object and find our subject, and just like get creative. And I think that's the most fun part, is because then it becomes really collaborative. Then it becomes just like a free flow. And yeah, I'll kind of just like, before we even take the drone off the ground, I'll talk to my pilot and be like, this is what I'm thinking. Let's try this shot and maybe this other shot. Like once we get to the other end of the road and we start coming back the other direction, let's start the drone here and we'll land here and we'll just kind of freestyle from there. But typically I set like a loose guideline for what we want to do and then make adjustments while we're in the air in real time. So, and typically how I will communicate to my pilot is either in terms of the drone's heading or in terms of where the camera is looking. So I'll either say, I'll say track camera right, track camera left, dolly in, dolly out. Or I'll say, because I can also see the FPV feed of the drone, I can say roll drone right, boom up, drop back down, come to a hold in 3, 2, 1. You know, we have a whole vernacular and language that we use with one another that's both short, concise, and and very straight to the point. And I think that's really what it takes to be on the same page in every given moment, because things happen really, really fast when you're in the air. Depending on the platform that we're flying, whether it's 3 minutes or 15 minutes of flight time, you know, that time goes by really, really fast. And so it's important to be on the same page 100% of the time, and to be able to just react quickly in the moment and be decisive. I see a lot of people, um, when, you know, outside of our company, when they're flying drones, or I've been to the RC field, or I've had new people come in when I'm training them, they're very they take too much time to think it through. And I think it's important to do that thinking on the ground, and then while you're in the air, to just be able to make quick decisions. And whether it's the right or the wrong decision, you know, when you're just practicing, at least it's okay. It doesn't need to be the right or decision every time. But I think in order to uh, flex that muscle more and to get better and better at this job, you just need to be able to make decisions quickly.
You can get kind of lost and overconfident, like you think it's a computer game. Like I remember, like I've flown drones for a while, and I got overconfident, and I was just like, instead of going up, I went down and I crashed it, and then it's kind of like, whoa, like this is real. Like it's not just a computer game. Like you kind of have to remind yourself, like you get really nervous, or you get like super like hot and sweaty, because you know this is like, it's a real thing that has consequences. So in terms of like, have you experienced like crashes, I'm sure, like throughout your experience? Like,
Yeah, I mean, we've had our fair shares of ups, and we've had our fair share of downs. And you know, I think that's inevitable in any industry that you choose. Is there's always going to be ups and downs, but it's how you bounce back from those tough days, and how you learn from those experiences, that separates you from everyone else. And you know, I think we've done a really good job at learning, especially early on, from mistakes that we've made. And I think that's the mark of someone that's truly passionate about what they do, is they take that and they use it as fuel to be better.
and have you kind of developed rules or like safety measures in terms of like, how do you do it in terms of, you're probably not allowed to fly over people, or like can't be too close to like that kind of stuff, because that could be very dangerous in terms of like, I know there's FAA rules, but have you developed any rules on set for yourself? Like nobody's allowed to like talk to the pilot while he's flying, or like nobody's like that kind of stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, no, there's a myriad of things. And you know, like you said, there's real world consequences for for you know, your actions, especially when you're flying a massive 60-pound flying death machine. I mean, like, you can't overlook that. You know. And it's really important to mitigate risk wherever you can. And so yeah, some of those things specifically are having just like a safety meeting with the rest of production in the morning, just saying, hey everybody, here's the drone. It's big. It is dangerous. Um, we are the professionals here, and we're going to keep everybody safe. But while we are flying, please don't distract us. Um, you know, I'm also not the pilot, so I'm not the best person to ask this question to, because at the end of the day, the pilot is the pilot in command. Um, it's my job also to make sure that I'm not putting him in a position where he's between a rock and a hard place, and ends up in a tough spot where, you know, he is too close to people or something. But at the end of the day, yeah, the pilot is the person that has the license, and is the responsible party, right? And so all of our pilots have gone through extensive training to make sure that like all of our operations are safe, because at the end of the day, you know, making a commercial is not worth someone's life.
Like, are there certain like times where, you know, you guys will just evaluate how a pilot is doing in terms of like you can't be flying for too long without like, you know, fatigue and that kind of thing?
For sure. And that's something, we check on each other on a regular basis while we're on set. And, there's been times when like you end up being on set for like 18 hours and everyone's exhausted. And you got to just tell the producer, hey, look, this is getting to be a little bit too much. And, our pilots for safety. And those are the golden words too, is like, if you just say to a producer or someone that's pushing you on set that you have to do X, Y, and Z, or you can't do the shot for safety, like 95, 99% of the time, they're going to be like, okay, because people get it. Like our jobs are still not worth people losing fingers or, having life-changing, injuries over. It's just not worth it.
Yeah, and in terms of like some of the commercials you've worked on, are there any that you can kind of talk about that we can kind of like, I'll show it while you're kind of talking, like maybe if there's like a little list of things, I don't know if you want to talk about like the different brands or like some kind of specific moves, like you mentioned that Toyota Sienna one, like are there other ones like that you were kind of like very memorable for you, maybe you learned a lot, that kind of thing?
Another early one that I just have really fond memories of because it was such a fun experience was the Audi Sport footage that we shot back in like 2018, 2017. That was when Audi Sport first came to America. And we did this big week-long campaign where we shot, from all places, like Willow Springs International Racetrack to the Tustin hangars where they used to store blimps. And that was just so much fun. I mean, R8s and RS3s and, everything you can imagine. We just got to be really creative. We flew the Inspire 2 pretty much the entire time. But the director and the DP being Todd Bell, they were just super collaborative. And at that point, we had worked with them a few times. And so they just trusted us. And so typically what would happen is like they'd be in the Russian arm and they would get their shots and be down for a second. And we would just call over walkie and be like, hey, drone has a shot. They're like, great, take the car for a few minutes. And we would just kind of ping pong back and forth. And because of that, I think we got a lot of really unique shots that, the kind of shots that, at least up until that point, a lot of people hadn't seen from the Inspire. So that was like a really fun launching pad. Another fun one that pops out to me is all the footage of those three Ford Broncos going across that dry lake bed that I sent to you. Now, that wasn't like a professional commercial shoot for Ford, but that was us testing some new gimbaled FPV tools that, we had modified and wanted to kind of push to see, hey, what kinds of shots can we do with this? And what kinds of shots will this do that the Inspire won't do or the heavy lift can't do? And so we rented a couple Ford Broncos and we just went out to a dry lake bed and just spent the evening just getting creative and, really trying to just kind of see what energy we could bring to the shots that was unique about this system. Beyond that, let's see. Well, there's also, this isn't a car commercial, but there's a short film that I worked on for a DP named Rafael Leyva, and he wanted to fly a RE235 motion picture film camera. And up until that point, we'd only done it a few times, and it doesn't come without its challenges because you're combining old and new tech, right? You need, there is an SDI tap on the cameras, but it's an analog feed. So you have to convert that analog feed to an HD feed to get it into your video transmitter to be able to see what the hell you're shooting. Not only that, but like the camera by itself without a magazine is like, I think 13 or 14 pounds. So, for reference, an Alexa Mini is 5 pounds. A Sony Venice is something like 7 when it's stripped down. So you're talking like almost double that for this film camera. So we had to run really small magazines, like 200-foot magazines that offered us like, I want to say about 2.5 minutes of recording time, maybe a little bit less than that. But not only did he want to fly that camera, he also wanted to fly these big, heavy 7-pound Cooke anamorphic lenses. So all in all, our camera payload on our Ronin 2 gimbal underneath the heavy lift was something like 34 to 35 pounds, which was definitely up until that point the heaviest payload I had ever flown. So I knew that there's been quite a few people that have, flown with this heavy lift that we were flying called the Alta X, had flown over its maximum takeoff weight. So I was pretty confident that we could do it. And so after a test flight or two, my pilot, Steven, felt comfortable with it. And the shot was basically this beautiful landscape. It's actually the Disney Ranch up there in the valley where they shot Westworld. And the shot starts with these beautiful rolling hills, and then you reveal this old police car racing through this landscape. And basically it turned into like kind of a sexy car commercial move, but that we like wrap around the front of the car, land on the back of it, we go through this little canyon, and then the car goes down over a hump, and we boom up to reveal this beautiful scenery and the house in the distance that the car is going to. And I think that was just like a really rewarding experience, because there was a lot of things working against us. Not only did we have limited film on set, not only was the payload pretty heavy and just difficult to balance and to deal with, also flight time was very minimal because of that payload. But we were able to coordinate everything so concisely and work through the entire move on the ground so well that it only took like 2 or 3 takes to nail a perfect take. And so I think that was just a good example of, when tasked with a lot of variables, just the more like planning and talking and collaborating that you can do beforehand, the better off you're going to be when you actually go to shoot, and the more fun it's going to be because everyone's just on the same page.
It's kind of like training for a sport. Like, as long as everybody knows the plan, it's kind of muscle memory. You don't have to think about it as much. It just kind of happens naturally.
Exactly.
And then in terms of like the technology from that's probably like the old with the film camera and the big payload to the new now with the Inspire 3 coming out. Like, how have you seen like the progression maybe from the Inspire 2 to the 3? Like, what has changed? Like, I know that's a 8K camera now, but has the technology in terms of like what you do for a job, has that improved? Like, I know they can do like it's kind of motion control in the air. Have you been experimenting with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, of course. We've gone through all the features and we know the aircraft through and through at this point, but the instances where we actually utilize those types of features it's very rare. I think the biggest improvements just from like a day-to-day operations are things like its ability to hold a position in 3D space. I mean, its hover stability is by and far leagues beyond what the Inspire 2 was. On this drone, on the Inspire 3, if you push forward on the stick, it's actually going to go in a straight line forwards. Whereas with the Inspire 2, it ended up being pretty wonky, and it made it really difficult to fly straight lines like on dolly track. I think beyond that, I mean, its video transmission system is unparalleled. The range and quality of it is really, really good, although there is some latency. But there's always been latency with any DJI transmission system, so it's not new news, but it's still, you can notice it as a camera operator filming fast cars that you're always feeling like you're a little bit behind. But it's something you kind of just learn to deal with. You internalize it, and you just learn how to anticipate, I think, a little bit better. But it does add to the challenges of pulling off dynamic moves consistently.
Has the nighttime like shooting improved, like the image quality?
Oh yeah, I mean, it has a dual native ISO similar to like a Sony Venice of, I believe, 800 and 4000. So yeah, I mean, who doesn't love grainy, less grainy images in their nighttime shooting? Full frame sensor, dual native ISO, better color science, more dynamic range. Yeah, what's not to love?
And you guys have, like I saw on Instagram, you have a bunch of them. Do you have like how come you have so many?
Well, because it's a drone that we knew was just going to be used on a variety of film sets. It's going to be used on pretty much all of our jobs in one way or another, either as like a backup to say the Alta on like a big heavy lift commercial or feature film. Um, because on most big feature films or heavy lift jobs, bringing out two Altas is just excessive, and it's an insane amount of gear. So the Inspired 3 is now like a really beautiful, elegant solution, one case backup to, you know, say an Alexa Mini or a Venice or something of the sort. But beyond that, I mean, having redundancy is just really imperative in this line of work. Um, there's the old saying, at least in our world, that like two is one and one is none. And really, sometimes it even feels like three is one, because like little things just go wrong. Whether it's like a firmware update that just pops up on your remote while you're in the field without any internet like connectivity, or like, I don't know, like because the Inspire is such a lightweight airframe, I remember on the two, like the little legs would break all the time, which is where the antennas are for its video and its control. So like little things like that can just bone you when you're on set. And so it's really important to just have as many as you can so that you don't fail. And I think with something like the drone world specifically, everyone's had pretty much every single client I end up working with has a story about a horrible experience they had with the drone team. And so we go the extra mile to ensure that we are never the protagonist of those stories. We always like to be, you know, fully prepared and ready for a plan B or a plan C.
The film, like on the film sets, you have like the heavy lift and the Alexas and maybe the Red cameras. Like, do you guys own cameras as well, or you kind of get given the cameras from the production?
Yeah, so we own all the cameras that we end up flying on like the cinema FPV rigs that we fly. So if it's not a GoPro, it's usually like a Red Komodo or a Sony FX6, of which we own, you know, 4 and then 2 of. So we own a decent amount of cameras for the FPV stuff, just because with the FPV stuff, it's like they're even more susceptible to small things taking them out. So it's important to have the actual cameras in hand and ready to fly and backups if something were to happen. Plus, it's also really great to be able to practice with the actual payload that you're going to be flying on set. And it turns out that a Komodo is a lot less money than, say, a Alexa Mini. So I think instead of having 4 Alexa Minis, we have 4 Komodos, not only for price, but also just for form factor and, you know, ruggedness. The Komodos are not bulletproof, I'll say, but they're kind of the perfect FPV camera at 2 pounds and a global shutter. It's perfect for that.
And what about like birds? Have you ever had any birds kind of attack the drones? Like, how do you avoid that kind of thing?
You go down to the Long Beach, or what is it? It's the port of LA where the Queen Mary is sitting. There's a lot of seagulls there, and they're very territorial. And it's actually interesting. There's a guy that started a business called Hawk on Hand, and he has trained hawks, and production will hire him to come out and basically keep the drone safe by scaring away all the seagulls.
Oh, that's a good service. I guess you guys
We love him.
call him up a few times.
Yeah.
And then what else would be, I guess, just other aircrafts and maybe helicopters, because helicopters are meant to stay above. Have you done much work? I know like Fred North is like famous on Instagram for flying his helicopter. How do you kind of work with a helicopter crew if you're filming like a feature film and there's like a helicopter around?
It comes down to coordination every time, you know, and comfortability, and just making a plan and sticking to the plan for safety. We worked with someone named Kevin LaRosa on, what was that? That was on the show Snowfall. And basically he was in a picture helicopter posing as the LAPD, chasing after the main talent. And we were right up there, eye level with the helicopter. He was shining a spotlight down. And, you know, all it really takes to do this the right way is just 2 professionals just having a conversation and establishing exactly what the other one is going to do. And then again, just sticking to that plan. I mean, it's really very simple at the end of the day, but it's necessary.
What are some of your goals for the future? Like, what do you want to accomplish with like this aerial DP stuff?
Hmm, that's a really good question. I would say one of my biggest goals is just to continue to innovate, um, continue to be a creative force, continue to be an educator and a collaborator with DPs and directors that inspire me, and working with people that I've looked up to for a long time. Um, but yeah, I think continuing to create shots in my head and then figuring out now what can we design and build to do a shot like that, and then talking to my team and talking to my R&D guys who have at their disposal a CNC machine and multiple 3D printers and the ability to design custom parts and drones, to then be able to bring that idea into reality. I think that's where I feel the most fulfilled, and those are the times I feel like I'm on the right path and in the right career.
Do you ever do any like previs, kind of pre-visualization, like animations? Like I know there's like simulators that you can practice flying in. Do you ever use that to be like, all right, let's plan out a shot in the simulator that we can kind of show to a director or something like that?
I never have, but I feel like that's a great idea. Yeah, sometimes I mess around. I mean, like I said, I'm not the pilot. I'm the stick jockey or the camera operator telling the pilot where to fly. Um, and the simulators are great, but they're all FPV simulators. You can't have a gimbal on there and have a dual operator simulator. So like, it's kind of hard to there isn't like the right application, I feel like, to be able to do something exactly the way I'd see it in my head. And it's better for me to just go out to like the RC test field with one of my pilots and say, hey, let's try this, and then visualize there's a car right here, or to just like actually get one of the other guys to drive a car down like a random street out in the desert and just try it.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for like filmmakers that want to be aerial DPs that are kind of focused specifically on creating car commercials?
Yeah, I think the simulator we were talking about earlier is like a really good tool, because they even have, like, for instance, there's a game called Uncrashed, and it's basically just drift cars. So you could fly around drift cars, and so that's a good way to practice and find angles that you like. But I think one of the most valuable tools, at least for me, has been to study shots that I've seen other people do that I admire, and not just like watch them a couple of times and then move on, but like seriously sit there and study them. And whether you're the FPV pilot, or the Inspire 2 pilot, or you're the Inspire 2 camera operator, um, whichever one of those you may be, really study it and try and figure out in your mind's eye how they did that. Like, what kind of subtlety or like settings within the drone systems did they have to use to accomplish something like that? Um, and I think the devil is always in the details. It's always the nuance of the tool that you're using, or how you communicate to your pilot if it's a dual operator system. I think the more, especially with the dual operator system, the more you can kind of create a synergy between pilot and camera operator, and the more you can think like one person, like, the shots are going to be so much better than anything you could do by yourself. So yeah, study and visualize, and study and visualize. That would be my advice.
And I think maybe a good idea would be to go out for somebody who's the aerial DP to go out and find the guys that already are the pilots, because the pilots themselves, they can't operate the camera and fly. So it's like if they have, like you said, the two of them together, they create one person. So it's like if you are looking to do what you do in terms of operating the camera in the sky, you need that pilot. So yeah, go on Instagram and find like the best pilots and team up with them, and then go out and shoot stuff. Like I think a good training ground would be go to maybe a racetrack where the people know that you're filming them rather than on the public road, and they could practice that way.
100%. Yeah, I've been there before.
Because yeah, I know there are a lot of like FPV drone pilots, and they're kind of like solo guys. They don't need like the support system. But if you're looking to do like the dual operator thing, that takes two people. There's no way that you can do it by yourself.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, you can't do one without the other with those systems. I mean, sure, you can put the Inspire 2 in follow me mode and just be a single operator, but then you're flying sideways and you didn't see that bush to your left because you're flying facing this direction but going that direction. You know, it's a lot safer, and not only safer to be dual operator, but like you can be more dynamic and more consistent that way. And you know, just because you're a good drone pilot doesn't necessarily mean like you're a drone cinematographer. Like I think having a really good drone pilot, someone that can pilot the drone really skillfully and take direction really well, allows the aerial DP or the camera operator to then really express creatively what they see in their mind. And then they just figure out a way to communicate that to their pilot in a way that you can both understand in real time. Um, and that's where some of the magic starts to happen.
I'm sure you have tight turnarounds too. Like, do you get called up like how many a week before or something, and you kind of have to do it, or
sometimes the day before, dude. So and then between that and then like the live productions that we travel all over the country and the world for, and you know, and then all your personal life stuff, it fills up real quick.
Thanks, Caleb.
All right, take
See
care.
ya.
Bye.